of how that's used in line 4 of the example. List.insert will insert the item that you input at the index that you input. You could also see how that's used in line number 7 of this example. So here's one thing to note about the insert function. It will obviously put that basketball input at index number 1 of sports. But what it does is it pushes all of the items in front of the inserted item one spot forward. And you can see how that works in the second line that's printed in the outputs. List.remove, and you put in an item as an input, will remove the first instance of item from the list, and list.pop also removes the item, but this time it looks at an index instead of the item itself. Okay, now let's talk about dictionaries. I'm not going to go into them in too much detail because they're not super important for this lesson, but we decided that it's good to talk about all collection types here now, so we don't have to deal with them later when we talk about more complex features like functions and classes. So a dictionary is an unordered mutable collection that labels its values with keys instead of indexes. Now a key in a dictionary is used exactly in the same way as an index, and a key is a value, usually a string or a number, that is used to identify a value in a dictionary. So as you can see, you would put the name of the dictionary, bracket, key, and that corresponds to the value whose key is key. You can see the example that I put in the right. On line number 8, I'm printing whatever item corresponds to the key genre in the dictionary book 1. And as you can see, it prints fantasy. Dictionaries can contain duplicate values, but not duplicate keys. And keys and values are separated by colons, and key value pairs are separated by commas. And one last note. People normally put a new line between dictionary elements to make them more readable. And that's especially important when you're doing stuff like JSON parsing, which is an important feature in web development. All right, sets. A set is an unordered mutable collection that doesn't label nor index its elements. I'm not going to go into too much detail into sets for the same reason I didn't go into too much detail with dictionaries, because they act way differently. So sets, since they don't label nor index their elements, they can't contain duplicates. So they're pretty much generally used to test whether a value is present in a set or if a set is contained within another set. You can see how you can check whether a set's elements are contained within another set using the isSubset function. I'm just going to go over this really briefly. As you can see in line number 10 in that example, it's checking whether set 3 is a subset of set 1. What does that mean? Well, it means that are all of the elements of set 3 present in set 1? As you can see, set 1 does contain the elements 0 and 1. So as you can see in the output, it does print set 3 is contained within set 1. Now, usually sets can only contain strings, integers, and floats. Lists, I didn't mention this before, but lists and tuples can also contain, not tuples, lists can contain other lists, but sets cannot. But yeah, again, you don't really need to know that information that closely for this lesson.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're getting into for loops, which is very important in all programming languages. So for loops are basically used when you have a block of code that you want repeated for a specific number of times. So for example, you want a condition for 10 or 20 amount of times. Now you could use if statements, that is true, but for loops are like more precise, more efficient, and like they're better to use because there's less code. And basically in for loops, they're basically like if statements, except there's like a little things different here and there. So you start off with a keyword for, and you use the letter I and range. So now I is basically like, it's a pre-created variable, so you don't have to actually create the variable. It's like a placeholder variable. You don't really need to know the specifics about it, but you just need it to determine how long you want the loop to run. And range is basically shows the specified limits. And it's a function that returns a specific set of numbers starting from a number. And range basically, it would, if you don't specify it would start from 0 and it increments by a specific number and stops before another number. So it includes, for example, like we did here, 1 to 10. It includes the number 1 but stops before 10, so it does not include 10. That's why when we do print hello world, there's only 9 hello worlds instead of 10. So in this thing, you basically have to do for I in range, and you have to like show the specific number you wanted, like 2 or 1 number, and then, or you could use 3, which I'll get into in the next slide. And you do a colon, and then you do whatever condition you want. You can include how much ever code you want inside the for loop, but you have to remember that you need to indent the block of code. All right. So these are like some more examples of it, and it does not have to be I. The variable does not have to be named I. It can be another name like X. And you can loop through the letters of a word as showed in the first example. I did for X in monkey, print X. Monkey is a string, and every time the loop runs, it goes through the letters in monkey and it prints out monkey. So you can print out the number of times as well if you wanted to, but right now I just printed out the letters. This is pretty useful if you want to keep repeating blocks of code. And in the second example, I did for I range 0, 12, 3, colon print I. So basically, it goes from 0 to 12, not including 12, but it goes by threes. The third value is how many times, how much the sequence is added by. So how many numbers does it skip? Like, it goes by threes, basically. It starts from 0 and then it ends before 12. So that's why it does not include 12. Okay? And here are some extra terms in loops that you need to know that you can use in while loops as well. We have break, continue, pass, and we'll talk about nested for loops as well. So break is when you want to stop the loop before it gets through all of its loop. And the first example, I think it shows, the second example shows break. So here we have a list using what we talked about lists, and apple, banana, cherry for X and fruits. And inside of that is a if conditional statement. So if X is equal to banana, then break. And break will just like end the code. So it'll get out of the loop. And if that, after that if conditional is run, it will print X. So it goes through the list during the for loop, it goes to apple, and when it reaches banana, it breaks. So it does not print banana or cherry because the break stops the loop. And continue, it stops the current loop and continues on with the next loop. So here we have the same list, fruits equals apple, banana, and cherry. For X and fruits, if X is equal to banana, continue. It will not do the same as break. It will just skip banana. So instead, it prints out apple and cherry. So see if you understand this process. And then we have pass. If you don't have a loop with any content in it, pass skips the loop to avoid an error. If you just want the loop and you haven't decided what you want to create, but you still want to run the rest of your code, you could just do pass and it will skip the for loop and it won't print an error. So as you see, it just prints done. And nested for loops, which it's just basically touching on what we talked about last workshop. Nested for loops are basically a loop inside of a loop. So they're like nested if conditionals. And here's some other examples of nested for loops, else statements, etc. So in the first one, we have a nested for loop, which is basically a for loop inside of a for loop. And it prints out the adjectives and the fruits: red apple, big banana, tasty cherry. And then tasty apple, tasty banana, tasty cherry, those stuff, okay? In the second one, we have an else statement, and this is not really important, but it's just thought is something you should know. Well, an else statement with a for loop just executes after the loop is finished. So it runs the loops and it prints out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then afterwards, it just prints out all done. The third one, it just prints out odd numbers, which is a cool way you can use for loops. Here it shows for x in range 10, it checks if x is even by using the mod sign. So if x is like mod 2 is equal to 0, then continue. So that skips the number. So it skips even numbers and prints out odd numbers, which is pretty cool. And I've used that actually in one of my beginner lessons. So yeah, those are some of the cool things you can do with for loops. And now we'll be talking about intuitive while loops, which is while loops are pretty similar to for loops, but they're like a little different here and there. So while loops executes a set of statements as long as the condition is true. So once the condition becomes false, the while loop will stop running and it will end basically. So in this example that I show, while n is less than or equal to 1000, n times 2 and print n, and n was 1, okay? So before like n reaches 1001, it will keep going on. So here it prints this out, and 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on. And after that, it just prints out done. So this is like, it basically multiplies n by 2 every time the loop runs, or for every iteration. And iteration is basically like how many times it wants you to run. It is possible to have a while loop whose condition never becomes false, such as while true. So you don't want to have that because it'll keep running on infinitely until you stop it manually, which can be a pretty big pain. So I don't recommend doing that, and that will cause an error at the end. And here are some more examples of while loops. While loops are pretty similar to for loops, and they can have break, continue, pass, and the else statement. So in the first example, we have break, where we have another if conditional inside of the while loop, and it will skip 2, or sorry, it will, sorry, not skip 2. After 3 is over, it'll just stop running.
Okay.
And then, yeah, so it prints 1 to 3 instead of 1 to 6. Second one, we have an else statement, which is basically the same. It prints out the while loop, and then it prints out value reached. And then the third one, we have continue, which we use to skip 3 when it comes in the while loop. So it prints out all the numbers 1 to 6 but 3. It's basically the same as for loops, right?